Hey guys, so I wanted to make a video of the books that I read in 2018 that meant the most to me, that were my favorite, and the ones that I could recommend to the most to anybody, basically. Um, these aren't necessarily books that came out in 2018. I believe only one of them here actually did come out this year, but rather there's the ones that had the biggest impact to me out of all the books that I read this past year. So I just wanted to go ahead and make a quick video. I have all these books laid out in front of me, and I'm just going to wing it and talk about why I liked them, and hopefully if they strike your interest as well, you could consider picking it up as well, and hopefully you enjoy them as much as I did. So one of the first books I read in 2018 was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. I actually read this book for a class I was taking in university, and the premise around this class was it was called Imaginary Worlds. So we'd read novels and read nonfiction based across these kind of people who are able to create these entire worlds through their imagination. And after reading this book, I can definitely tell you that that is something that this author did remarkably well. And of course, some people probably know this book better by its movie adaptation, Blade Runner. I hadn't read or I hadn't watched Blade Runner before reading the book, so I had really no idea what this was about, other than it being, classic sci-fi. So I started reading this book with no expectations at all, but upon reading it and upon just the first chapter, I really got this image of the world that Philip K. Dick illustrated for this book very quickly, and it was really easy to grasp onto in the sense that the setting is so moody and noir and really something that is to be admired. The book is about a man named Rick Deckard who is tasked in eliminating illegal replicants, which are in this future society androids that are indistinguishable from humans, who are initially used for labor off Earth, as they're stronger. They're supposed to take orders and not resist. They don't need to be paid, that sort of thing. So it really opens up this kind of commentary on like class and the worth of different classes. And Rick is this character who is tasked with taking out these defectors who are basically androids who want a life of their own. They don't want to be under the thumb of their creators anymore. And this book raises a lot of interesting questions about what it is to be human. How different are we from these androids who look just like us, and in a lot of instances act more human than we can. This book has a lot of themes of religion that I really enjoyed, and after watching Blade Runner, after reading the book, I felt a lot of that was absent from the movie. A lot of the themes that I really enjoyed in this book, and a lot of the messages kind of wasn't in the movie for me personally. So, and I really think this is a book that, even though if you read the movie beforehand, you can still get a lot out of this book. You can still really enjoy it for what it is, and really just marvel in this world that this incredible author came up with. The next book on the list is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Kies. I read this book shortly after Do Androids Dream, and I loved it for a lot of the same reasons, but a lot of the different reasons. This book also raises a lot of interesting questions about how we as humans interact with one another, how we perceive the worth of people. And it does this through another really interesting premise, which is we follow a character named Charlie Gordon, who is born with a mental handicap and is viewed as by society and by everybody around him as lesser because of his lack of intelligence. So what this book does, interestingly, is he is embarked on this journey where he undergoes a scientific experiment, and he basically, his brain is rewired. I don't exactly remember how it worked, but he basically becomes a genius over the span of a few weeks or months or whatever it is. And it's really interesting to see this progression, because this is written in the first person, and how it's basically told through the sense of Charlie's journal entries, which is very interesting because you physically get to see this person become intelligent through his words and through his dialogue, how he learns to spell, how he learns to eventually learn other languages, how to do grammar works. You know, it's difficult to read at first, simply because of the misspellings. But I don't think that should deter anybody from reading this book, because the sense of journey and just being along with this character, Charlie Gordon, in his go on this journey with Charlie Gordon and this admittedly unrelatable journey, but in a sense it's also very relatable. It's also very relatable because we all have this, or most of us probably have this sense of our worth being tied to something that isn't up to us or is valued by the way people look at us. So you get a lot from this book, I think. I got a lot from this book. And it really makes you think about the values that we put on people and why they're there and should they be there. Do we look at people unfairly and treat them unfairly because they're different from us, and who chooses what's the norm? This book is also very emotionally powerful. I don't typically cry during books or movies, but I got a bit misty-eyed through this book, and it really is a journey. I keep saying that word, but I really think it is. And I think this is a book that anybody can enjoy, and I definitely recommend it. Switching it up a bit, this year I also read a trilogy of fantasy novels, and those being the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I actually read all 3 books in this trilogy this year, right after the other actually, because I just needed to know what was going to happen next. I went into this series looking for something that would scratch the itch after, not having a Song of Ice and Fire book in a while. And I think it definitely scratched that itch, in the sense that these novels are, lengthy, and they're epic, and they are also very dark and grisly and just brutal, to put it simply. These books follow a cast of characters from, you have the barbarian Logan Ninefingers, who is just on a journey for revenge, who is looking for a purpose, who is fueled by rage and bitterness, that which makes him sound like a unlikable character, but he really is likable, and he's just one of the many characters that make up this story. Something to be said about all of these characters is that they are all morally gray, in a sense, that there is no heroes, there are no downright villains, there are just people who are put in circumstances and they make decisions, and they are who they are. They're not archetypes, they're just people. And there's different spectrums to that. There is characters like Glokta, who is a very interesting character. He's a soldier turned torturer, who was very, very fun to read along with. One of my favorite fantasy characters, I have to say, and that seems to be a common thing with people who have read this book, that they really like the character of Glokta. And then there's characters like Jazal, who is just trying to become, make a name for himself. A stubborn and arrogant kid who is just trying to value himself by being a soldier. And every character has such an interesting progression, and the next book to the next book, these characters are very different in the sense of what they've been through, what they accomplished, what they've done to get what they want, and the course of the world around them and how that shapes them as people. It's really interesting to see, and this has a remarkable story in the sense that there are twists and turns, and you have no idea where things are going to go. And one of the most, for me, satisfying endings to a trilogy, in the sense that what this book series meant to portray, in my mind, it really hit it out of the park, in my opinion. I was always constantly surprised by what this author was putting on the page, and the writing style and the gritty tone of it really really made this series special for me. The next book is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This book is very different and not exactly what I expected. This book is beautifully written. I absolutely adored every sentence that Oscar Wilde put on the page. I know that he is originally a poet, I believe, unless I'm getting that wrong. This is, I believe, his only novel. I could be very wrong there. But you can certainly tell that this guy is a poet. They're just the way that he conveys this very, very intriguing story. It's about a man named Dorian Gray. We follow his life from youth to older age, and we basically see how this mentality of his that is very prominent, how he places beauty above all else. What is beautiful in the world and what is ugly in the world is basically the things that matter the most in this man's life. And we see what becomes of that, how that very black and white mentality turns them into this very thing that he wanted to avoid and was disgusted by his entire life. So Dorian makes the wish one day that he never has to grow old, because the beauty and the picture-perfect moment of him when he's having his portrait taken at, I believe, 18 years old, is everything. That beauty, that the worth of this character is in that picture. That image that is very tangible, but not exactly. Life isn't just appearance. Life is much more, and if you value this one thing above all else, the things that you do not devote importance to kind of creeps up. And I don't want to give too much away. This book was very, very, very entertaining. Again, and raises another. It seems to be a common thread through these books, that it raises just very interesting questions and interesting perspectives into human psyche. Through these differing plot points, it really details and outlines a very important message. And even if that's not something you're exactly looking for, it's just a very intriguing and interesting read to go into the mind of Dorian Gray, what he does and what he becomes. The next book, going back to fantasy, and this is a book that I just cannot say enough good things about. And if you're a fan of fantasy at all, I'm sure you've heard of this series. And this year I read Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, which is book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. The Brandon Sanderson continues this epic series in book 3, and there was honestly a lot of expectation to fulfill after reading The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, 2 books that just completely blew my mind when I read them in 2017. I was honestly very worried about how it could be this consistently good for this long, and considering the length of the books, these could easily be, well, it's only book 3 with the page count. I mean, typically this could be like book 7 from a lot of series. But Sanderson continues to hit it out of the park with Oathbringer. I absolutely love this book, and I love how we got into the head of Dalinar more than we have before. Dalinar being probably the most one of the more intriguing characters to me, just his mysterious background and his transition from being the Blackthorn to who he is today, and how it is he became to be the person he is today, of course, and just following up with these amazing cast of characters with Shallan and Kaladin. Shallan's story, this book was really something that I enjoyed a lot, and it's probably, I'm praising Dalinar a lot, but I really, really think Shallan is probably my favorite character. But this book is just completely original in everything that it accomplishes. But this is a story about a war between human and these things called Voidbringers. But it's much more complicated than that, and everything... I've never been shocked, just utterly, completely, just had to put the book down because I just couldn't process my feelings that I have in this series, done numerous times. I really can't put into words just exactly why I love this series so much. It's just an epic in every sense of the word. The world that Sanderson has created with Roshar has so much life to it, and all these characters have so much life to it, and none of these characters feel like cookie cutter characters. It's not like the assassin, the noble, the outlaw, that sort of thing. Every character is rooted in the story and has an important part to play, and it's just fantastic. It's just fantasy in every sense of the word, and everything I look for in a fantasy book. The good chunk of this book, my heart was pumping so rapidly. I just couldn't believe what I was reading, and I cannot wait for the continuation of this series. The next book on my list is actually pretty different from the others, and this is a book that really surprised me. I'm not sure where it came from. It was recommended to me through a writing group that I was in university, just offhand. I didn't really put any notice into it, but put it on my list of to be considered. And this is actually probably didn't mean to reveal it there. This is probably the best book I've read this year. If I were to pick one, I didn't want to rank these exactly, but this is the book I enjoyed the most, I think. And it's really surprised me. It's not exactly my genre, but the book is The Book Thief by Marcus Cusack. This book destroyed me. I have never been so emotionally connected to a book's characters than I have in The Book Thief. I said I don't typically cry during novels. I think that this is definitely the exception to the rule. This novel just destroyed me. The book is a historical fiction set during World War II, and we follow the character of Liesl Memminger, who is Jewish and who is experiencing firsthand the horrors of the Nazi regime. And what's really, really unique about this book is that it's not told through the perspective of Liesl Memminger, but rather told through the perspective of death, a manifestation of death, or the Grim Reaper, if you may, tells this story. I'm going to focus. Tells the story of this girl, this remarkable girl who basically just grows up in this setting, and how in the darkest of times there is still life, and there's still light in the manifestation of this girl. This book has so much heart, and I really have to compliment Suzak's writing style. He really takes a different approach to writing than I've ever really experienced. He just breathes life to every single word. Every word is, I keep saying it, but alive. And these characters are alive. You fall in love with the relationships between Liesel and Rudy, and Liesel and Hans. And in a way, it's kind of almost like a collection of short stories, and where every part has its own different, thread. Their own different theme, and they thread together to make this, this complete story that is heart-wrenching, it's emotional, it's meaningful, and it's really something that is uplifting in the sense that the setting, of course, which is based obviously on real life, of this just horrific environment that was created by in World War II. But but again, it's uplifting in the sense that there is so much beauty to be found amid the ruins, amid the ash, and the perspective of this being told by death itself, which is very fascinating, and makes it almost worth reading on its own. And I can't really say why death, being the narrator, is so powerful without kind of spoiling the end or most of it. This is a story that I just loved through and through, and I cannot recommend enough to anybody. And while it is arguably YA, young adult, this is something that's also very heavy-hitting, very brutal, very uncomfortable at times, but also very, very insightful, and it's beautiful in a sense of the word. I can't put it into words. Like most of this video, I cannot put into exact words what makes it so great. I just know that I love this. The last book I'm going to mention is actually different in the sense that it is nonfiction. I don't typically ever read nonfiction, but I really wanted to pick up this book for personal reasons, and also just having it being recommended. That is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. So this book, in a sense, is arguably a self-help book, and it accounts the real story of the author's experience in a concentration camp in World War II. And what makes this really unique in terms of it being in the perspective of somebody in a concentration camp is that Viktor E. Frankl is a psychiatrist, and he's kind of able to more readily understand what's going on around him, and what's going on in the minds of the people that are put through such horrifying experiences. What it does to the human mind through what he's witnessed firsthand. So this book is kind of broken up in two parts. The first half, roughly, is a detail of his experiences and what he was able to witness, and what he made sense of while he was in the camps. He's able to come to these conclusions because he faced them firsthand. He's able to see that the people, and he has evidence of the people who really gave up and lost their meaning in life, are the people who unfortunately fell victim, people who perished during the concentration camps, or were more prone to in that sense. So it really proved to him that the importance of meaning in life not only accomplishes giving somebody value in their life, but actually uh, allowed them to persevere in times of the most utter tragedy. And after his brutal recollections of the concentration camps, the second half goes into more of the practice and more of the theory of what he calls logotherapy, which is therapy in the sense that you go into it with the primary goal of finding what is meaningful for somebody and how to make that meaning overcome every other struggle in this person's life who was having difficulty. I personally got a lot out of this book. Just somebody who, from time to time, did question, what kind of meaning is there out there? What are my goals? What is my meaning? And this book definitely made it easier to answer some of those questions. There is something in the foreword of the book that I think really kind of hones in on why this book is important, at least in this aspect of it. In the foreword it says, typically if a book has one passage, one idea with the power to change a person's life, that alone justifies reading it, rereading it, and finding room for it in one's shelves. This book has several such passages. And that is something I can personally attest to. There are several instances in this book where I reading it, I just put it down and said, this makes so much sense. This really makes it easier to understand why I feel the way I do. And reading this book, I had the sense, probably sounds really corny, but I had the sense that I felt less alone reading this, because it perfectly outlined something for me, and I don't want to get too personal with this, but there's a certain part of this that I was reading it and I just said, this is it. Like this is me he's talking about right now. I just felt so personally attached to what he was saying, and so and found so much meaning, for lack of a better word, in his words and the messages he was trying to convey, and just trying to help people realize the potential within themselves. This is a very different book than what I was used to, but I'm so glad that I read it. And it's a very short book. I think if you're unsure, I really think this is something you should pick up. If it ends up helping you, that's great. If not, I mean, it's only 100 or so pages. But I definitely think this is a book that everybody could get at least something out of. Yeah, so that was some of the books that I really enjoyed this year, and hopefully I did at least an okay job of explaining what I got out of them and what you can possibly get out of them, and the different reasons that I love these different books. I hope you enjoyed. I hope your 2018 was great. I hope you stick around, because I plan to make reviews in the future of some of my favorite books that I'm going to read 2019 onward. Also various TV series that I might review as well. I'm always free for recommendations. If you guys see some of these books that you read before and you really liked, and you also really liked this other book, feel free to recommend, and I might review it in the future as well. That being said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you around. Peace.